The telegram had changed everything. Molly Sullivan clutched it so tightly in her trembling hands that the paper crinkled, the sound almost lost beneath the rhythmic clatter of the westbound train carrying her toward a future she could scarcely imagine. April 1875. She was 22 years old, unmarried, and heading to Wyoming Territory to wed a man she knew only through 5 exchanged letters, and a promise of stability her life in Boston could no longer offer. The endless prairie stretched outside her window, so different from the crowded streets she'd known all her life. 3 days ago, she had been packing the few belongings she could bring, saying goodbye to her younger siblings, promising to send for them when she could. 3 days ago, she had been Miss Molly Sullivan, eldest daughter of a deceased Irish immigrant, desperate to escape the crushing weight of poverty and limited prospects. Now she was a bride-to-be, bound for a town called Whispering Pines, to marry Thomas Harrington, cattle rancher. She smoothed the wrinkled paper, reading the words for perhaps the 100th time since it had arrived. Arriving Wednesday stop will meet train stop blue shirt hat stop T. Harrington. Such simple words that now controlled her fate. The train whistle blew, pulling Molly from her thoughts. The conductor moved through the car, announcing, "Whispering Pines Station. 10 minutes to Whispering Pines." Her heart lurched. She hastily gathered her meager possessions, one carpet bag containing her clothes and a few cherished books, a small wooden box holding her mother's rosary and wedding band. She patted her hair, attempting to tame the auburn waves that had escaped their pins during the long journey. Her dress, though simple, was her finest, a dove gray cotton with a white lace collar, carefully mended where it had frayed. When the train finally ground to a halt with a screech of metal on metal, Molly remained frozen in her seat. Other passengers rose, collecting their belongings and filing toward the exits, but she couldn't seem to make her legs work. What if he wasn't there? Worse yet, what if he was, but took one look at her and changed his mind? "This is your stop, miss." The conductor's kind voice broke through her panic. "Yes, sir." Molly forced herself to stand, gripping her carpetbag with white knuckles. "First time out west?" he asked, noting her pallor. "Is it that obvious?" She attempted a smile. "You'll be just fine, miss. Wyoming's got its rough edges, but there's good folks here too." Molly nodded gratefully and stepped down onto the platform, immediately enveloped by the warm June air, heavy with unfamiliar scents: dust, pine, livestock, and something wild she couldn't name. The station was little more than a wooden building with a telegraph office attached. A handful of people milled about, some greeting arriving passengers, others loading freight onto the train, and then she saw him, standing slightly apart from the others. Tall and broad-shouldered in a blue shirt, just as his telegram had promised, a well-worn Stetson in his hands. Thomas Harrington. He was scanning the disembarking passengers, his expression a mixture of anticipation and apprehension that likely mirrored her own. He was older than she had imagined, perhaps 30, with sun-bronzed skin and lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of days spent under the harsh western sun. His dark hair was slightly too long, as if he hadn't found time for a proper cut before meeting his bride. Their eyes met across the dusty platform, and for a moment neither moved. Then, taking a deep breath, Molly stepped forward, closing the distance between her old life and her new one. "Mr. Harrington." Her voice sounded small, even to her own ears. "Miss Sullivan." He nodded, replacing his hat and then removing it again in a gesture that spoke of uncertain courtesy. "You made it safely." "Yes." She found herself at a loss for further words, though they had corresponded enough that she should have something to say. "May I?" He reached for her carpetbag, and as she handed it over, she noticed his hands large, weathered, with calluses and small scars that told the story of a life of physical labor. They were nothing like the soft, manicured hands of the Boston clerks and shopkeepers she had known. These were hands that had built something, that had wrested a living from the unforgiving land. "Is this all you've brought?" he asked, glancing at the single bag. "Yes, I'm afraid I traveled light," he nodded, seeming unsurprised. "The wagon's this way." Molly followed him to a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 horses. He helped her up onto the wooden seat with a careful hand at her elbow, then stowed her bag in the back before climbing up beside her. They sat in awkward silence as he took the reins and guided the horses away from the station. The town was smaller than Molly had expected, though lively with afternoon activity. A general store, a saloon, a small church, and various other establishments lined the single main street. People glanced their way as they passed, curious about the newcomer in their midst. Whispering Pines isn't much, Thomas said, following her gaze, but it's growing. 20 new families in the last 2 years. It seems charming, Molly offered, though in truth it looked rough and unfamiliar to her eyes, so different from Boston's cobbled streets and brick buildings. The ranch is about 5 miles outside town. Not a grand place, but it's mine, free and clear. Pride tinged his voice, and Molly found herself wondering about the man beside her. His letters had been straightforward. Even sparse, he had 200 acres, 50 head of cattle, a sturdy house with 3 rooms. He wasn't looking for love, he had written plainly, but for a partner, someone to share the work and perhaps raise a family. She had appreciated his honesty then. Now, sitting beside him, she wondered what else she should know about the man she had agreed to marry. They traveled in silence for a while, the rhythmic clip-clop of hooves against dirt, and the occasional creak of the wagon the only sounds. The vastness of the landscape overwhelmed her, endless sky stretching above, rolling hills dotted with scrubby vegetation, distant mountains hazy on the horizon. "It's different from what you're used to," Thomas observed, breaking the silence. "Very," Molly nodded. "It's so open." "Takes some getting used to. Some folks never do." The unspoken question hung between them. Would she be one of those who couldn't adjust? Before she could respond, he continued, "I received your last letter just before you left Boston." He kept his eyes on the road ahead. "The one about your father passing and your concerns for your siblings." "Yes." Molly twisted her hands in her lap, remembering the difficult words she'd penned, explaining how her father's death from consumption had left her responsible for 3 younger siblings. How the marriage they'd arranged now seemed not just a matter of her future, but of their survival as well. "I hope that doesn't change things between us." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "I told you I wanted a partner, not a burden to carry. But family isn't a burden, Miss Sullivan. It's a responsibility. I understand that." Relief washed over her. "Thank you, I wasn't sure." "That is, I wondered if you might reconsider our arrangement. I'm a man of my word." He glanced at her briefly. "If we suit each other, if you find you can be content here, then your family will be welcome too when the time is right." Molly blinked back sudden tears. "That's very generous." "It's what's right." His tone suggested the matter was settled. They rounded a bend in the road and Thomas gestured ahead. "That's it there, Harrington Ranch." Molly leaned forward eagerly. A modest but well-built house sat nestled against a backdrop of pine trees with several outbuildings nearby. A corral held a few horses, and in the distance, she could make out cattle grazing on the hillside. Smoke curled from the chimney, suggesting someone was there. "My foreman's wife, Martha, has been getting things ready," Thomas explained, noting her surprise. "I don't have much in the way of help, just Hank and Martha Wells. They live in the smaller cabin over there. Hank helps with the cattle, Martha tends the garden and chickens. They've been with me since I started." As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps in her 40s, plump and pleasant-looking, with gray streaked hair tied back in a practical bun. Thomas drew the wagon to a halt in front of the house and helped Molly down. Her legs felt stiff from the journey, and she was acutely aware of the dust on her dress and the disorder of her hair as Martha approached. "So you're the bride." Martha's smile was warm as she looked Molly over. "Welcome to Whispering Pines, Miss Sullivan. I'm Martha Wells. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Wells. Please call me Molly." "Martha's fixed up the house," Thomas said, retrieving Molly's bag from the wagon, "and prepared supper for us." "I hope you'll find everything satisfactory," Martha said. "I've aired out the spare room for you. I assumed you'd want your own space until the wedding." Molly felt her cheeks flush, both with embarrassment and gratitude for the woman's tact. "Thank you, that's very thoughtful." "I'll leave you to get settled." Martha patted Molly's arm. "Supper's warming on the stove. I've set the table for 2. With a knowing smile at Thomas, who nodded his thanks, Martha headed toward the smaller cabin a short distance away, leaving Molly and Thomas standing awkwardly before the house that was to be their home. "Shall we?" Thomas gestured toward the door. The house was simple but clean and solid, with a main room combining kitchen and living areas, and two doors leading off it that Molly assumed were bedrooms. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a rocking chair pulled up nearby. The furniture was plain but well-crafted: a pine table with 4 chairs, a sideboard with dishes, a small sofa covered in faded but clean fabric. "Martha's put your things in here." Thomas led her to the smaller of the 2 bedrooms. It contained a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a chest of drawers, and a small table with a basin and pitcher. A window looked out toward the pine forest behind the house. "It's lovely," Molly said, meaning it. After the tenement apartment she'd shared with her siblings, this room felt spacious and private. "It's not much," Thomas said, setting her bag on the bed. "It's more than I had in Boston." She turned to face him. "Mr. Harrington, Thomas," he corrected. "If we're to be married, you should use my given name." "Thomas," she nodded. "I want you to know that I understand what this arrangement is. I'm not harboring romantic notions or expectations beyond what we've discussed in our letters. I'm here to be a helpmate, to work alongside you, to build a life that benefits us both." Something flickered in his eyes: respect, perhaps, or relief. "I appreciate your practicality, Molly. I'm not a man for flowery words or grand gestures. But I promise to treat you with respect and provide for you to the best of my ability. That's all I ask." She offered a small smile. "You must be tired from your journey. Why don't you rest before supper? There's water in the pitcher if you'd like to wash up." Molly nodded gratefully, and Thomas left, closing the door behind him. Only then did she sink onto the edge of the bed, the enormity of what she had done finally hitting her. She was thousands of miles from everything familiar, about to marry a man she barely knew. In a land that seemed as alien as the moon. From her carpetbag, she withdrew the small packet of letters, the sum total of her knowledge of Thomas Harrington. Untying the ribbon that bound them, she spread them on the quilt, running her fingers over the strong, slanted handwriting. The first letter had been a response to her advertisement in the Matrimonial Gazette. "Young woman, 22, well-educated, seeks correspondence with gentlemen of good character in Western Territories. Object: matrimony." His reply had been straightforward. "I am 30 years of age, owner of a cattle ranch in Wyoming Territory, seeking hard-working wife to share in building a future, not wealthy but stable. Reference is available from town minister and bank manager, T. Harrington." 4 more letters had followed, each revealing a little more about the man: his 5 years in the cavalry before purchasing his land, his hopes to expand his herd, his belief in honest work and fair dealings. Nothing about family, she realized now. Nothing about his past before the army. Molly sighed, carefully retying the ribbon around the letters and tucking them away. She poured water into the basin and washed her face and hands, then changed into a clean dress, a simple blue cotton that had fared better on the journey than her gray one. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Thomas setting a cast iron pot on the table, along with a loaf of bread. "Martha's beef stew," he explained. "Best in the territory. It smells wonderful." Molly's stomach growled, reminding her how long it had been since her meager breakfast on the train. They ate mostly in silence, though Molly caught Thomas watching her occasionally, his expression unreadable. The stew was indeed delicious, rich with vegetables and tender beef, and the bread fresh baked. "When would you like the wedding to take place?" Molly asked finally, setting down her spoon. Thomas considered. "The circuit preacher comes through next Sunday. Would that suit you, so soon?" Molly hadn't expected it to happen quite so quickly, though she knew there was little reason to delay. "We could wait for the following month if you prefer." "No," she shook her head. "Next Sunday is fine. I suppose I hadn't thought about the details." It would be a simple ceremony after the regular service. The townspeople would expect to be invited to a meal afterward. Nothing elaborate. "Of course." Molly nodded. "I don't have a proper wedding dress, but my blue dress should be appropriate with some freshening up." "You'll need proper clothes for ranch life anyway. We can go into town tomorrow, visit the general store." That's very kind, but I don't want to be an expense. You're to be my wife, Thomas interrupted firmly. That means what's mine is yours. I'm not a wealthy man, but I can provide what you need. Molly nodded, touched by his practical generosity. After supper, Thomas insisted she rest while he took care of the dishes. She sat in the rocking chair instead, watching as he moved efficiently around the small kitchen, his large hands surprisingly deft as he washed and dried the few dishes. There was something reassuring about his methodical movements, his quiet competence. Later, as twilight deepened into night, they sat together before the fire he had built to ward off the evening chill. Molly had found one of her books, a volume of Tennyson's poetry, and was reading quietly, while Thomas whittled a piece of wood with a small knife, his hands shaping it with the same care he seemed to bring to everything. "What are you making?" she asked, curious. He held it up, the beginning of a small bird taking shape. "Just passing time. My father taught me, said idle hands find mischief. It's beautiful." Molly leaned closer to examine the delicate carving. "You're very skilled." A faint smile touched his lips, gone almost before she was sure she'd seen it. "Practice. I've made dozens over the years. Do you sell them?" "No." He returned to his work, his tone closing the subject. Molly returned to her book, sensing he wasn't ready to share more. In the firelight, she stole glances at him, studying the profile of the man she was to marry. Strong jaw, straight nose, brow furrowed slightly in concentration. Not handsome in the conventional way of Boston gentlemen, but compelling in his rugged steadiness. When the mantel clock struck 9, Thomas set aside his carving. "It's late, you should rest. Tomorrow will be a busy day." Molly nodded, marking her place in the book. "Good night, Thomas, and thank you for everything." He nodded, those weathered hands brushing wood shavings from his trousers. "Good night, Molly." In her small room, Molly changed into her nightgown and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind in the pines, the occasional creak of the house settling. So different from Boston's constant hum of humanity. She thought of her siblings, 13-year-old Patrick, 11-year-old Eileen, and 8-year-old Finn, now staying with their aunt in a cramped apartment, not much better than the one they'd left. She had promised to send for them once she was settled, once she knew this new life would work. She couldn't fail them. She wouldn't. With that resolve, Molly slipped under the quilt, her hand finding the small locket around her neck that held a tiny portrait of her mother. "Guide me, Mama," she whispered into the darkness. "Help me make this work." Morning came with golden light streaming through the window and the aroma of coffee and bacon. Molly dressed quickly, pinning her hair in a simple style, and found Thomas already at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in hand. "Hope I didn't wake you," he said, rising. "Coffee's hot if you'd like some." "Thank you." Molly accepted the cup he poured for her, adding a splash of milk from the small pitcher on the table. "You're up early. Sun comes up, work begins." He gestured to a plate of bacon and biscuits. "Help yourself, nothing fancy, but it'll keep you going." As they ate, Thomas outlined the day ahead. "Thought we'd head to town after breakfast. You can see more of Whispering Pines, meet a few folks. There's a dressmaker, Mrs. Adler, who can help with anything Martha and the general store can't provide." "That sounds wonderful." Molly was eager to learn more about the community that would be her home. "Is there a school for when my siblings come?" "Small schoolhouse on the edge of town. Teaches a young woman from back east, Miss Copeland. About 20 children attend, ages 5 to 16. And a church. Methodist, though the preacher doesn't much care what you call yourself as long as you believe in something." Molly nodded, relieved. While not devoutly religious, she had been raised Catholic and valued the community a church provided. After breakfast, they set out for town in the wagon. The morning was bright and clear, the air crisp with a hint of pine. Molly found herself breathing deeply, enjoying the clean scent after years of Boston's coal smoke and crowded streets. "It's beautiful here," she remarked as they traveled. "So different from what I'm used to, but beautiful." Thomas glanced at her, seeming pleased. "Changes with the seasons. Wait till you see the mountains with snow on them or the wildflowers in the high meadows in summer." "I look forward to it." She meant it, surprising herself with how quickly she was warming to this strange new place. Whispering Pines looked different in the morning light, more welcoming, with people going about their business, wagons and horses tied up outside the various establishments. Thomas helped Molly down from the wagon in front of the general store, a large wooden building with a covered porch. "Mr. Harrington," the storekeeper, a round man with a full beard, called out as they entered. "This must be your intended." "Jacob Miller, this is Miss Molly Sullivan," Thomas introduced. "Jacob runs the best-stocked store this side of Laramie. Pleased to meet you, Miss Sullivan." Jacob beamed. "Welcome to Whispering Pines. We've all been mighty curious about the woman who captured our Thomas here." Molly felt herself blush. "Thank you for the welcome, Mr. Miller. My wife's in the back." "Dora," he called. "Come meet Mr. Harrington's bride-to-be." A small, energetic woman with graying blonde hair emerged from behind a curtain. "Oh, the Boston lady. Welcome, welcome. I'm Dora Miller. We're so pleased you've come." Molly found herself enveloped in a warm hug before she could respond. "Thank you, Mrs. Miller." "Now you must need everything, coming all that way with just what you could carry," Dora continued, already leading Molly toward the women's section of the store. "We've got fabric, ready-made items, all the notions you could want. Jacob, show Thomas those new tools that came in." "I'll take care of the lady." Before Molly could protest, she was swept along on a whirlwind tour of the store, with Dora pulling out fabrics, holding them against Molly's complexion, suggesting patterns and styles appropriate for ranch life. Thomas, she noticed, was deep in conversation with Jacob at the other end of the store, examining what looked like farm implements. "He's a good man, you know," Dora said quietly as she showed Molly a bolt of sturdy cotton. "Keeps to himself, but fair in his dealings and never turns away a neighbor in need." "I believe he is," Molly agreed, "though I confess we're still getting to know each other." Dora patted her hand. "That's how it often is out here. The knowing comes with time and shared work. My Jacob and I were strangers when we married 30 years ago. And now I can't imagine a day without him, ornery as he can be." Dora smiled fondly at her husband across the store. "You need grit to make it in Wyoming, dear, but it sounds like you've got plenty." "A woman who'd travel across the country to marry a stranger has backbone, or desperation," Molly said wryly. "Sometimes they're the same thing." Dora's eyes were kind. "Now let's find you some proper boots. Can't be ranching in those city shoes." By the time they finished, Molly had acquired 2 work dresses, a Sunday dress, sturdy boots, a warm shawl, undergarments, and various household items Dora insisted were essential. Thomas added tools, seeds, and a length of sturdy rope to their purchases, settling the bill without comment on the total. As they loaded their purchases into the wagon, a tall woman with silver-streaked dark hair approached, her bearing suggesting someone of importance in the small community. "Thomas Harrington, were you planning to introduce your bride to the whole town or just the Millers?" Her tone was teasing, her smile warm. "Mrs. Adler." Thomas actually removed his hat. "Was heading to your shop next. Molly, this is Alina Adler. Owns the dressmaking shop, chairs the school board, and knows everyone's business. Someone has to keep this town civilized," Alina replied good-naturedly. "Miss Sullivan, a pleasure. I understand the wedding is set for Sunday." "Yes, madam." Molly found herself standing straighter under the woman's appraising gaze. "Then you must come by my shop tomorrow. Every bride deserves something special, even on short notice. I have some lovely cream-colored silk that would suit your coloring perfectly." "That's very kind, but I couldn't impose." "Nonsense. Consider it a wedding gift. This town sees too few newcomers, especially educated young women." She gave Thomas a pointed look. "Bring her by tomorrow afternoon, Thomas. I won't take no for an answer." After Alina departed, they continued through town, with Thomas pointing out the various establishments: the blacksmith shop, the small hotel, the sheriff's office, and finally, the schoolhouse where Molly's siblings would eventually attend. It was a simple building with a bell tower, set slightly apart from the main street. As they approached, the door opened, and a young woman in a sensible blue dress emerged, books in her arms. "Miss Copeland," Thomas called, drawing the wagon to a stop. "Got someone for you to meet." The teacher looked up, her serious expression brightening. "Mr. Harrington, and this must be your fiancé." Molly Sullivan, this is Rachel Copeland, our school teacher. Miss Sullivan, welcome to Whispering Pines. Rachel's handshake was firm, her gaze direct. Mr. Harrington mentioned you have younger siblings who might be joining us. Yes, 3, Molly confirmed. Patrick, Eileen, and Finn. They're still in Boston with my aunt, but I hope to send for them once I'm settled. I look forward to meeting them. We can always use bright minds in our classroom. Rachel glanced between Molly and Thomas. Perhaps you might consider helping at the school occasionally, Miss Sullivan. Mr. Harrington mentioned you're well educated. Surprised, Molly looked at Thomas, who gave a slight nod. I taught at charity school in Boston for a time. I would be happy to help if needed. Wonderful. We can discuss it after you're settled, Rachel smiled. I won't keep you, but please come by anytime. The children would love to meet a real Bostonian. As they drove away, Molly turned to Thomas. You told her about my teaching experience. He kept his eyes on the road. Mentioned you had schooling. Seemed relevant when she asked about you. Molly felt touched that he had shared even that small detail, that he had remembered it from her letters. Thank you. I would enjoy helping at the school. The rest of the day passed in a blur of introductions: the town doctor, the banker, the owner of the small restaurant where they stopped for a simple lunch. Everywhere, Molly was greeted with curiosity and unexpected warmth, the townspeople seeming genuinely pleased to welcome a newcomer, especially Thomas's bride-to-be. As they headed back to the ranch in the late afternoon, Molly felt overwhelmed but hopeful. Everyone's been so kind. Small towns, Thomas said simply. Everyone knows everyone, makes for nosy neighbors sometimes, but good ones when trouble comes. And does trouble come often? She thought of the sheriff they'd met, a grizzled man named Sam Jenkins who'd appeared harmless enough. Sometimes. Cattle rustlers now and then, occasional drunken cowboy causing a ruckus, nothing like the big cities. That's reassuring. Molly had seen enough trouble in Boston streets to last a lifetime. Back at the ranch, they found Martha waiting, eager to hear about their trip to town. As the women unpacked Molly's new belongings, Thomas excused himself to check on the cattle with Hank. So what do you think of our little town? Martha asked as they hung the new dresses in Molly's wardrobe. It's charming, Molly replied honestly. Different from what I'm used to, but everyone's been welcoming. And Thomas, how are you finding him? Molly considered the question carefully. He's not what I expected, but in a good way. He's kind in his own quiet fashion. Practical. Martha nodded approvingly. He's a good man. Keeps his thoughts to himself most times, but his actions speak plain enough. Been through hardships that would break most men, but came out stronger. What kind of hardships? Molly couldn't help asking. Martha hesitated. Not my story to tell, dear. He'll share when he's ready. Just know he's got his reasons for being cautious with his heart. The cryptic response only heightened Molly's curiosity, but she respected the older woman's loyalty to Thomas. I understand. We're still getting to know each other. That you are, and that's as it should be. Martha patted Molly's hand. Now, let me show you around the kitchen properly. If you're to be mistress of this house, you should know where everything is kept. The remainder of the day passed in domestic instruction, with Martha patiently showing Molly the workings of the ranch house, how to operate the cook stove, where supplies were stored, the best way to draw water from the well, and 100 other details of rural life that had never been part of Molly's Boston existence. By supper time, Molly's head was swimming with new information, but she felt more grounded, more connected to this place that was to be her home. Martha declined their invitation to join them for the meal, insisting she needed to get back to her own house and husband. Left alone with Thomas again, Molly found herself less nervous than she had been the previous evening. They worked together to prepare a simple supper of ham, potatoes, and greens from Martha's garden. You're a quick learner, Thomas observed as Molly confidently stoked the cookstove to the right temperature. I've always had to be, she smiled slightly. After my mother died, I was responsible for our household. Different stove, same principles. He nodded, watching her with something like approval. Martha says you've taken to her instructions well. She's a good teacher, patient. Molly hesitated, then added, she speaks very highly of you. The Welses have been with me from the beginning. He started setting the table, his movements efficient. Wouldn't have made it without them those first years. How long have you had the ranch? 5 years. Bought it after leaving the cavalry in 70. He paused. It wasn't much then, just the house half-built and 50 acres, added on since. You've accomplished a great deal in a short time, he shrugged. Had help, and luck. As they ate, Molly ventured more questions, trying to piece together the man across from her. Do you have family, Thomas? You've never mentioned them in your letters. His expression closed slightly. Parents died when I was young, raised by my uncle in Missouri until I was 16, then joined the army. No siblings. I'm sorry. She recognized the brief answers for what they were, a gentle but firm boundary. Nothing to be sorry for. It was a long time ago. He changed the subject. Tell me about your brothers and sister. What should I know about them? Grateful for the shift in topic, Molly spoke warmly of her siblings Patrick's serious nature and love of mathematics, Eileen's artistic talent, little Finn's boundless energy and curiosity. Thomas listened attentively, asking occasional questions that showed genuine interest. They sound like fine children, he said when she finished. Your parents would be proud of how you've looked after them. I've tried. Molly felt tears threatening and blinked them away. It hasn't been easy, especially since Father died. It rarely is. His voice held understanding beyond simple sympathy. But you've done what needed doing. That counts for something. Yes. She met his eyes across the table. As have you with this ranch. A moment of connection passed between them, not romance, but recognition of a shared quality, a similar determination to build something worthwhile despite obstacles. After supper, as they again sat before the fire, Thomas surprised her by asking about her book. Tennyson. Not familiar with his work. Would you like me to read some? Molly offered, pleased by his interest. He nodded, and she opened to one of her favorite poems, Ulysses, reading in a clear voice that filled the small room. She glanced up occasionally to find Thomas listening intently, his weathered hands still for once, resting on his knees. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. He has a way with words, your poet. To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. That's something worth remembering. It is, Molly agreed, touched by his appreciation. It's why I've always loved this poem, the determination to continue even when the journey is difficult. A useful philosophy out here. Thomas rose, moving to the small bookshelf in the corner. He selected a volume and returned, holding it out to her. Not poetry, but you might find it interesting. Journal of Lewis and Clark. Good to know the history of the land you're living on. Molly accepted the book, running her fingers over the worn leather binding. Thank you, I'd love to read it. Another quiet moment passed between them, more comfortable than awkward now. Then Thomas cleared his throat. We should turn in. Tomorrow I need to show you the ranch properly, and you've got that appointment with Mrs. Adler. Of course. Molly rose, still holding both books. Good night, Thomas. Good night, Molly. In her room, Molly changed for bed and sat reading the Lewis and Clark journal by lamplight, fascinated by the accounts of the very territory she now found herself in. She fell asleep with the book on her chest, dreaming of vast landscapes and unknown possibilities. The next morning brought more practical matters. After breakfast, Thomas took her on a tour of the ranch, starting with the barn and corral where he kept his horses. This is Sadie, he said, introducing her to a gentle bay mare. Thought she might suit you. She's steady, not prone to spooking. She's beautiful. Molly reached out tentatively to stroke the horse's nose. But I should tell you, I've never ridden before. Figured as much. We'll start your lessons after the wedding. He watched her with the horse. Can't get far in these parts without riding. They moved on to the chicken coop, the small vegetable garden Martha tended, the smokehouse, and the tool shed. Thomas explained each aspect of the ranch's operation with patience, answering Molly's many questions without condescension. And the cattle. She asked, noting they hadn't yet ventured to the distant pastures. Hank's with them today. We'll ride out another time. He glanced at the sky. We should head to town soon if you're to meet Mrs. Adler. The dressmaker welcomed them warmly, shooing Thomas away to attend to other business while she whisked Molly into her workroom. True to her word, Eleanor had a length of cream-colored silk waiting. Nothing elaborate, she assured Molly, who was already protesting the extravagance. But every bride deserves something special, even in a frontier town. Besides, you'll need a good dress for church and social occasions. As Alina took measurements and discussed designs, she subtly probed for information. Thomas mentioned you taught school in Boston. At a charity school, yes. For immigrant children mostly. A noble profession. We value education highly here despite our remote location. Alina pinned fabric around Molly. And your family? Thomas said you have siblings. 3 younger ones still in Boston. I hope to bring them west once I'm settled. Thomas is good with children, you know, not that he has much opportunity to show it. Alina's eyes held a knowing look. He helps with the Christmas program at the schoolhouse every year, carved wooden toys for all the younger children last year. The image of Thomas's weathered hands creating delicate wooden toys for children touched Molly deeply. He's a gifted carver. I saw his work. A man of hidden talents, our Thomas. Alina smiled. Not one for many words, but his actions speak volumes. By the time Alina finished the initial fitting, promising the dress would be ready by Sunday morning, Molly had a better understanding of her husband to be standing in the community respected, even beloved, though somewhat removed from its social life. She found Thomas waiting outside, deep in conversation with a tall, distinguished-looking man in a black coat. Ah, Miss Sullivan. The man turned as she approached. I'm Reverend Pierce. I understand I'll be performing your wedding ceremony on Sunday. Yes, Reverend, it's a pleasure to meet you. Likewise, I was just telling Thomas that I'll need to meet with you both before then perhaps tomorrow afternoon to discuss the ceremony and, other matters related to marriage. Molly felt herself blush, understanding the implication. Of course, Reverend. 3 o'clock at the church then. He shook their hands. Until tomorrow. On the ride back to the ranch, Thomas seemed preoccupied, responding to Molly's comments with brief answers. Only when they were nearly home did he speak unprompted. If you've changed your mind about the wedding, about staying now would be the time to say so. Startled, Molly turned to him. I haven't changed my mind. Why would you think that? He kept his eyes on the road. Whispering Pines isn't Boston. The life here is hard, especially for a woman used to city comforts. I wouldn't hold you to our agreement if you found it wasn't what you expected. Thomas. She waited until he looked at her. I came here knowing it would be difficult even. I'm not afraid of hard work or simple living. I made a commitment when I accepted your proposal and I intend to honor it. Relief flickered across his face so briefly she almost missed it. Good, that's good. Is there a reason you're asking now? She studied him. Has something happened to make you doubt? No, he hesitated. Just wanted to be sure you had the chance to decide freely, now that you've seen what you're getting into. His consideration touched her. I appreciate that, but my decision stands. He nodded, and they continued in silence, but the air between them felt lighter somehow, as if an unspoken concern had been addressed and set aside. That evening, after supper, Thomas surprised her by asking if she'd like to walk with him. The sun was setting, painting the landscape in gold and amber as they strolled toward the pine forest that gave the town its name. It's beautiful here, Molly said, breathing in the scent of pine and sage. Best time of day. Thomas walked beside her, hands in his pockets. When the work is done and the light turns everything to gold. They walked in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds their footsteps and the occasional call of a bird settling for the night. At the edge of the trees, Thomas stopped, gesturing toward a fallen log. Thought you might like to see this. As they sat, Molly gasped softly. From this vantage point, they could see across the valley to the distant mountains, now bathed in the fiery glow of sunset. The ranch lay below them, peaceful in the gathering dusk. This is. She struggled to find words adequate to the vista before them. My favorite spot on the ranch. Thomas's voice was quiet. Come here sometimes to think, to remember why I keep going when things get hard. I can see why. Molly couldn't tear her eyes from the landscape. It's magnificent. They sat in silence as the light faded, the first stars appearing in the deepening blue above. Molly was acutely aware of Thomas beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his presence, solid and reassuring. I want you to be happy here, Molly. His words were so soft she almost didn't hear them, or at least content. She turned to look at him, his profile outlined against the darkening sky. I think I could be, with time, he nodded, still gazing at the horizon. Time we have plenty of. As they walked back to the house, Molly found herself wondering about the man beside her, what experiences had shaped him, what dreams he harbored beyond the practical goals he'd shared in his letters. There were depths to Thomas Harrington that she was just beginning to glimpse, layers of the man hidden beneath his quiet exterior. She thought of the wedding fast approaching, of the life they would build together, and felt not fear but a growing certainty that she had made the right choice in coming to Wyoming, in agreeing to marry this steady, thoughtful man with the weathered hands and watchful eyes. The next day brought final wedding preparations. Martha arrived early, arms full of wildflowers to decorate the house and church. "Can't have a wedding without flowers," she declared, setting Molly to work arranging them in jars and vases borrowed from neighbors. Thomas had business in town, he said, leaving the women to their preparations. When he returned mid-morning, he carried a small package which he handed to Molly without ceremony. "Wedding gift," he said simply. "Don't have to open it now." Surprised, Molly accepted the package wrapped in brown paper. "Thank you. I'm afraid I don't have anything for you, not expecting anything." He shook his head. "You came all this way, that's gift enough." When Martha stepped outside to gather more flowers, Molly carefully unwrapped the package. Inside lay a small wooden box, exquisitely carved with a pattern of pine trees and mountains. Opening it, she found a delicate silver chain with a simple pendant, a small star crafted from silver. "Thomas, it's beautiful." She looked up, touched beyond words. "The box I made." He gestured awkwardly. "The necklace is from the jeweler in Laramie. Thought you should have something proper for a wedding." "I love it." She held up the necklace. "Would you help me put it on?" He hesitated, then stepped forward, taking the delicate chain from her hands. Molly turned, lifting her hair as Thomas fastened the clasp with surprisingly gentle fingers. She was acutely aware of his breath on her neck, the careful way his weathered hands managed the tiny clasp. "There." His voice sounded rougher than usual. Molly turned back to face him, her hand going to the star resting at her throat. "Thank you. I'll treasure it always." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a hint of vulnerability quickly masked. "We should get ready for our meeting with the Reverend." The meeting with Reverend Pierce was both practical and philosophical. He discussed the ceremony itself, simple but dignified, and then moved to deeper matters: the meaning of marriage, the commitments they were making to each other. "Marriage in these territories isn't just a personal arrangement," he explained, his kind eyes moving between them. "It's a cornerstone of civilization, of community building. You're not just joining your lives but contributing to the future of Whispering Pines itself." He asked them about their understanding of marriage, their expectations of each other. Thomas spoke of partnership, mutual support, building a legacy together. Molly spoke of respect, companionship, creating a home not just for themselves but eventually for her siblings and children. The Reverend asked gently, "Have you discussed your hopes in that regard?" Molly felt herself blush, suddenly aware that this fundamental topic had not been explicitly addressed in their correspondence or conversations. Thomas cleared his throat. "If we are blessed with children, they would be welcome. A ranch needs heirs. And you, Miss Sullivan, I've always hoped for children of my own someday," she said honestly, "though I already consider myself a mother in many ways to my siblings." The Reverend nodded, satisfied. "I believe you two have a solid foundation for a marriage, not based on fleeting emotions or romantic notions, but on shared values and goals. That's a marriage that can weather the storms that will inevitably come." He ended their session with a prayer and a reminder to be at the church by 10 on Sunday morning. As they walked to the wagon, Thomas seemed pensive. "Reverend's a good man, practical." "Yes," Molly agreed, still thinking about their discussion. "Thomas, should we have talked more about children? It seems an important matter to have left unaddressed." He helped her into the wagon before responding. "Seemed presumptuous to discuss before we were married, but if you have concerns." "Not concerns exactly, just I would like children someday, when we're ready." He nodded, climbing up beside her. "As would I. My parents died before they could see grandchildren. I'd like to continue the Harrington name." It was the most he'd said about his family, and Molly treasured the small glimpse into his thoughts. "Thank you for telling me that." The day before the wedding brought a flurry of activity. Martha and 3 other women from town arrived to help prepare food for the celebration, afterward roast beef, ham, bread, pies, and cakes. Molly found herself welcomed into their circle, included in their good-natured chatter and gentle teasing. "Never thought we'd see the day Thomas Harrington took a wife," one woman, introduced as the blacksmith's wife, remarked. Half the unmarried ladies in the county had set their caps for him, but he never seemed to notice. Or pretended not to, another added with a laugh. "Smart man, knowing when to look the other way." "Thomas is particular," Martha defended him. "Always said he'd rather be alone than marry without purpose." "Well, he's found his purpose now." The blacksmith's wife smiled at Molly, "and a fine choice he's made." Molly worked alongside them, learning as much about her future husband through their stories as she had in her direct interactions with him. They painted a picture of a man respected for his integrity and work ethic, known for quiet generosity in times of need, but private about his personal thoughts and feelings. Thomas himself spent most of the day with Hank and several other men, preparing the barn for the wedding celebration. Tables and benches were brought in, lanterns hung from the rafters, the floor swept clean by evening when the women had departed and the ranch was quiet again. Molly found herself both exhausted and keenly aware that this was her last night as Molly Sullivan. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Thomas Harrington, committed to a life and a man she was still coming to know. She sat on the porch as twilight deepened, listening to the night sounds of the ranch when Thomas joined her, offering a cup of coffee. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. "They're probably not worth that much," she smiled, accepting the coffee. "Just reflecting on how much my life has changed in such a short time, having second thoughts." "No," she shook her head firmly, "only wondering what my parents would think seeing me here. My mother always hoped I'd marry for love, have the romance she and my father shared." Thomas was silent for a moment, his face half hidden in the growing darkness. "My parents had that kind of marriage. Don't remember much about them. I was 7 when they died, but I remember how they looked at each other, like they shared a secret no one else knew." Molly was touched by this rare glimpse into his past. "That's beautiful. What happened to them, if you don't mind my asking?" He stared into the darkness. "Influenza. Took them both within days of each other. I went to live with my father's brother afterward. He was a different sort of man, believed hard work and discipline were all that mattered." "I'm sorry, Thomas." She resisted the urge to reach for his hand, sensing he wouldn't welcome the gesture. He shrugged. "It was a long time ago." They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Thomas spoke again. "I can't promise you romance, Molly. Not the kind in books or the kind your parents had, but I can promise respect, honesty, and doing my best to build a good life with you. That's all I have to offer." "That's more than enough," she said softly. "More than many marriages begin with." He nodded, seemingly reassured. "We should turn in. Big day tomorrow." "Yes," Molly rose. "Good night, Thomas, and thank you for everything you've done to welcome me here." "Good night, Molly." He remained on the porch as she went inside, a solitary figure against the vast Wyoming night. Sunday dawned clear and bright, as if the heavens themselves approved of the union about to take place. Molly woke early, her stomach fluttering with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. This was her wedding day, a day she had imagined differently as a young girl, but one she now faced with determination and cautious hope. Martha arrived shortly after breakfast, bearing Molly's wedding dress from Alina Adler. "She finished it late last night," Martha explained, carefully laying the garment across Molly's bed. "Said to tell you it's her finest work in years." The dress was simple but elegant cream-colored silk with modest lace trim at the collar and cuffs, the bodice fitted, the skirt falling in graceful folds. Alongside it, Martha placed a small crown of white wildflowers. "For your hair," she explained. "It's tradition here." Brides wear flowers gathered the morning of the wedding. Tears pricked Molly's eyes at the thoughtfulness. "It's perfect, thank you, Martha. Now, let's get you ready. Can't have Thomas waiting at the altar." With Martha's help, Molly bathed and dressed, her hair arranged in a simple but elegant style, the crown of flowers nestled among her auburn waves. The star pendant Thomas had given her rested at her throat, catching the light when she moved. "You look beautiful, child," Martha said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Thomas won't know what hit him." "I hope he approves," Molly said, suddenly nervous about her appearance. "That man would approve if you came to the church in a potato sack." Martha chuckled. "But seeing you like this might just coax a real smile out of him." Thomas had already left for town, as tradition dictated the groom shouldn't see the bride before the ceremony. Hank arrived with the wagon, decorated with more wildflowers for the occasion, to drive Molly and Martha to the church. Whispering Pines seemed transformed as they approached the small church gleaming white in the morning sun, people in their Sunday best gathering outside, a festive air permeating the normally quiet town. "Whole town's turned out," Hank observed as he helped Molly from the wagon. "Don't get many weddings around here, especially not one involving Thomas Harrington." Inside the church, Molly waited in a small anteroom while the congregation settled. Through the door, she could hear the murmur of voices, the occasional laugh, the squeak of the pump organ as someone prepared to play. "Ready?" Martha asked, adjusting Molly's crown one final time. "As I'll ever be," Molly replied, taking a deep breath. The organ began playing a simple wedding march, and Martha opened the door. The small church was filled to capacity, every pew occupied, with some people standing at the back. All faces turned toward her as she entered, but Molly saw only Thomas, standing at the altar beside Reverend Pierce. He wore a clean dark suit that looked seldom used, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaven. But it was his expression that caught her heart, a look of wonder, quickly masked as he saw her in her wedding finery. Molly walked slowly down the aisle, aware of the smiles and whispers of the townspeople, but focused on the man waiting for her. This was Thomas Harrington, soon to be her husband, a man she was still coming to know, but one she already respected and perhaps could grow to love. When she reached him, he held out his hand and she placed hers in it. His weathered fingers closed gently around hers, strong and steady. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Pierce began, "we are gathered here today in the sight of God and this community to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple and traditional. They exchanged vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other until death parted them. Thomas's voice was low but clear as he made his promises, his eyes never leaving Molly's face. When it came time for the rings, Thomas surprised her by producing not just a simple band as she had expected, but a delicate gold ring set with a small pearl. "It was my mother's," he whispered as he slipped it onto her finger. The gesture brought unexpected tears to Molly's eyes. This man, so careful with his words and emotions, had given her a treasured family heirloom, a connection to the parents he had lost so young. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Pierce declared. "Thomas, you may kiss your bride." Thomas hesitated, then leaned forward, placing a gentle, almost tentative kiss on Molly's lips there first, brief but sweet, sealing their union before the gathered community. Applause erupted in the small church as they turned to face the congregation. Molly felt a curious mixture of emotions: relief that the ceremony was over, wonder at the step she had taken, and a growing certainty that, whatever challenges lay ahead, she had made the right choice in coming to Wyoming, in marrying Thomas Harrington. The celebration that followed at the Harrington Ranch was joyous and boisterous, with food and drink flowing freely, music provided by local fiddle players, and dancing in the decorated barn. Molly found herself passed from one townsperson to another, everyone eager to welcome her, to share stories about her new husband, to offer advice for ranch life. "You've brought life back to his eyes," Eleanor Adler told her quietly during a lull in the festivities. "It's good to see." "I've hardly done anything yet," Molly protested. "You're here, sometimes that's enough." Eleanor squeezed her hand. "Be patient with him. The best men often have the deepest wounds." Thomas moved through the celebration with quiet dignity, accepting congratulations, ensuring guests had enough to eat and drink, occasionally catching Molly's eye across the crowded barn with a look that seemed to ask if she was faring well. She would smile in response, reassuring him that yes, She was happy, overwhelmed perhaps, but content with her choice. As evening approached, guests began to depart, with much good-natured teasing directed at the newlyweds. Molly felt her cheeks burning at some of the more ribald comments, though they were delivered with affection rather than malice. Finally, only Martha and Hank remained, helping to restore order to the barn and house. "We'll finish up here," Martha insisted, shooing the newlyweds toward the house. "You two have had a long day." Inside, alone for the first time as husband and wife, an awkward silence fell between them. Molly stood in the main room, still in her wedding dress, suddenly uncertain what was expected of her, what Thomas might want or need. "You looked beautiful today," Thomas said finally, his voice gruff. "Still do. Thank you." Molly touched the wildflower crown, now slightly wilted. "And thank you for your mother's ring. I'm honored to wear it." He nodded, removing his jacket and loosening his tie. Seemed right. "She would have liked you, I think, strong like her." Another silence fell, weighted with unspoken expectations. Molly gathered her courage. "I should change, and we should talk about arrangements." Thomas met her eyes, understanding her meaning. "Take all the time you need, I'll wait." In her bedroom, no longer just hers, she realized Molly removed her wedding finery, carefully hanging the beautiful dress in the wardrobe. She washed her face and hands, brushed out her hair, and changed into her nightgown, covering it with a modest robe. When she returned to the main room, Thomas had built a small fire against the evening chill and was sitting before it, staring into the flames. He stood as she entered. "Molly," he seemed to struggle for words, "I want you to know, I have no expectations for tonight. Or any night until you're ready. We have time." Relief and something like disappointment mingled in her chest. "I appreciate that, Thomas, but we are married now." "Yes," he stepped closer. "And I meant every word of those vows, but marriage is more than one aspect, it's partnership, respect." "I won't rush you. Thank you." She was touched by his consideration. "Perhaps we could just talk for a while, get to know each other better," he nodded, gesturing to the sofa. They sat together, closer than they had before but still not touching, as the fire crackled in the hearth. "Tell me something I don't know about you," Molly suggested. "Something not in your letters," Thomas considered. "I wanted to be a doctor once, before the war, had some schooling even, enough to be the unofficial medic in my cavalry unit." "What happened?" she asked, surprised by this revelation. "War happened, made me see too much suffering to want to make a career of it." He stared into the fire. "Came west afterward, wanted open spaces, clean air, a place to build something lasting. And you have," Molly said softly. "This ranch is impressive, especially knowing you built it in just 5 years." "What about you?" he asked. "Something not in your letters," Molly thought for a moment. "I write poetry, not very good poetry, I'm afraid, but it comforts me. I've filled several journals over the years." "Would you share some sometime?" The request seemed genuine. "If you'd like." She smiled, pleased by his interest. "Though I warn you, it's mostly melancholy reflections on life in Boston. Still, I'd like to read it." He hesitated, then added, "Want to understand you better. Know what matters to you." They talked for hours, sharing small confidences, memories, hopes for the future. Thomas spoke of his plans for the ranch, his dream of expanding the herd, perhaps adding sheep eventually. Molly shared her hopes for her siblings' education, her desire to create a welcoming home, perhaps start a small school at the ranch for nearby children who lived too far from town. As the fire burned low, Molly found herself growing tired, the long day catching up with her. Thomas noticed her stifling a yawn. "It's late," he said gently. "You should rest." Molly nodded, suddenly nervous again about what came next. Thomas seemed to sense her uncertainty. "I'll take the sofa tonight," he said, standing. "Give you time to settle in." "Thomas, that's not necessary." "This is your home, your bed, our home now," he corrected. "And there's no rush, Molly. When the time is right for both of us, we'll know." His consideration nearly brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you, but please at least take your bed. I can use the spare room one more night." He shook his head. "I've slept in worse places than this sofa. I'll be fine." Recognizing his determination, Molly nodded. "Good night, then, and thank you, Thomas, for today, for everything." "Good night, Mrs. Harrington." The words sounded strange but right. A new identity she was just beginning to inhabit. In the bedroom, their bedroom, Molly lay awake for a long time, thinking of the man sleeping on the sofa just a few feet away. Her husband. A good man, she was increasingly certain, one who approached marriage with the same care and thoughtfulness he seemed to bring to everything. She thought of the weathered hands that had so gently held hers during the ceremony, that had fastened her necklace with such care, that built this ranch from nearly nothing. Hands that told a story of hard work and determination, of a life lived honestly if not easily. Sleep finally claimed her, and she dreamed of wildflowers and vast horizons, of a future slowly taking shape in this strange, beautiful land. The first weeks of marriage brought a new rhythm to Molly's days. She rose early with Thomas, preparing breakfast before he headed out to work the ranch. She learned the household routines, at first under Martha's guidance, then increasingly on her own as she gained confidence. Thomas began teaching her to ride, patient lessons on the gentle mare Sadie. At first, Molly clung nervously to the saddle, certain she would fall, but gradually she relaxed, even coming to enjoy the freedom of moving across the land on horseback. "You're a natural," Thomas told her one afternoon as they rode together, checking fence lines on the property's eastern boundary. "Most city folk take months to sit a horse that comfortably." "I had a good teacher," she replied, pleased by the compliment. Their evenings developed a comfortable patterned supper together, discussing the day's events, then reading by the fire or sometimes just talking, learning each other's stories bit by bit. Thomas remained true to his word, continuing to sleep on the sofa, never pressuring Molly for more than she was ready to give. But as the days passed, Molly found herself increasingly drawn to her quiet, thoughtful husband. She noticed small things: how he always made coffee before she woke, how he carved wooden animals when he sat by the fire in the evenings, the gentle way he treated the animals under his care, the respect he showed to everyone who worked for or with him. 3 weeks after the wedding, a letter arrived from Boston, the first news from Molly's siblings. She read it eagerly at the kitchen table, Thomas watching her reaction from across the room. "They're well," she reported, looking up with a smile. "Patrick has been offered an apprenticeship with a printer, and Eileen is helping our aunt with sewing work. Finn misses me terribly but is being brave." "That's good news," Thomas said. "About the apprenticeship." "Yes," Molly refolded the letter carefully. "Patrick has always been clever with mechanical things. This could be a good opportunity for him. You miss them." It wasn't a question. "Very much." She blinked back tears. "I know it was the right decision to come here to build a future that could eventually include them, but—" "We could send for them sooner," Thomas said quietly, "if that's what you want." Molly looked up, surprised. "Really? But the house is so small and we're still getting settled ourselves." "House can be expanded. Another bedroom wouldn't be hard to add." He shrugged as if it were a simple matter. "Winter's coming. Better to do it now than wait till spring." "Thomas, are you sure? It would change things considerably." "I married you knowing your siblings were part of the bargain." His expression was serious but kind. "They're your family, which makes them mine now too." Impulsively, Molly rose and crossed to where he stood, wrapping her arms around him in a spontaneous embrace. "Thank you. You can't know what this means to me." Thomas stood frozen for a moment, then his arms came around her, returning the embrace with careful tenderness. It was the closest they had been since their brief wedding kiss, and Molly was suddenly aware of the strength in his body, the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. She stepped back, flustered. "I'll write to them today. If they leave soon, they could be here before the first heavy snows." Thomas nodded, something indefinable in his eyes. "I'll talk to Hank about starting on the addition tomorrow." That night, after Thomas had again settled on the sofa and Molly had retired to the bedroom, she found herself unable to sleep, thinking of the man just beyond the door, of his generosity in agreeing to welcome her siblings so soon, of the way his arms had felt around her. Making a decision, she rose, wrapping her robe around her nightgown, and opened the bedroom door. Thomas sat up immediately, alert even in semi-sleep. "Molly, is something wrong?" "No." She stepped into the main room, illuminated only by the dying embers in the fireplace. I wanted to talk to you." He moved to make space for her on the sofa, and she sat beside him, gathering her courage. I think it's time you stopped sleeping out here, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. In the dim light, she saw his eyes widen. Are you sure? There's no rush, Molly. I'm sure. She reached out, tentatively placing her hand over his. I'm your wife, Thomas, in name and in law, but not fully, and I'd like to be. He turned his hand over, entwining his fingers with hers. I don't want you to feel obligated. It's not obligation. She squeezed his hand. It's choice, my choice. For a long moment, he looked at her in the firelight, searching her face for any sign of uncertainty. Then, with infinite gentleness, he raised his free hand to her cheek. Molly Harrington, he said softly, you are the bravest woman I've ever known. She turned her face into his palm, pressing a kiss to the weathered skin. Take me to bed, Thomas, please. He stood, drawing her up with him, and led her to the bedroom that would, from this night forward, truly be theirs. There, with tenderness and care, they completed their marriage, discovering each other in the most intimate way, learning together the language of touch and response that needed no words. Afterward, lying in his arms, Molly felt a sense of rightness, of completion. This man, her husband, had shown her nothing but respect and consideration from the moment she arrived, and she found herself falling into something that, if not yet love, was its close cousin. I'm glad I came to Wyoming, she whispered into the darkness. Glad I answered your letter. His arms tightened around her. So am I, more than I can say. The weeks that followed brought a deepening of their bond, a growing ease with each other that extended beyond the bedroom. They worked together to prepare for the arrival of Molly's siblings Thomas and Hank, building the addition to the house. Molly and Martha preparing beds and furnishings. Letters went back and forth to Boston, arrangements made for the children's journey west. Patrick, at 16, would accompany his younger siblings on the train, a responsibility he accepted with pride. He'll be a good influence on Finn, Molly told Thomas as they sat on the porch one evening watching the sunset. Patrick's always been serious, even as a small child. Sounds like someone I know, Thomas teased gently, a side of him that emerged more frequently now. I had to be, Molly defended. After Mother died, someone had to keep the family together, and you did. He took her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. Just as you're doing now, bringing them here. October brought the first snow, a light dusting that melted by midday but served as a reminder that winter was approaching. The addition to the house was completed just in time. 2 small rooms connected to the main house by a covered walkway, simple but sturdy. It's perfect, Molly declared, inspecting the finished work. The boys can share one room and Eileen can have the other. Might be a bit crowded for the boys once they're grown, Thomas observed, but it'll do for now. We can always expand again when needed. The casual way he spoke of the future, of their life together stretching ahead, warmed Molly's heart. This was no longer just an arrangement of convenience, but a true partnership, growing stronger with each passing day. November brought the telegram they'd been waiting for. Arriving Tuesday, November 16, stop train from Laramie stop, all well stop Patrick Sullivan. Molly could barely contain her excitement, counting the days, preparing the children's rooms with fresh linens and small touches to welcome them. Do you think they'll like it here? She asked Thomas anxiously the night before their arrival. It's so different from Boston. Children adapt, he reassured her, holding her close. And they'll have you, that's what matters most. The day of their arrival dawned clear and cold. Molly was up before dawn, too excited to sleep, preparing a special meal for the evening, making sure everything was perfect. Thomas watched her with fond amusement, catching her for a quick embrace as she hurried past him. They're going to love it, Molly, because you're here. They set out for town mid-afternoon, the wagon loaded with warm blankets for the return journey. Molly could barely sit still as they traveled, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon as if she could somehow see the train approaching from miles away. The train was on time, pulling into Whispering Pines Station with a screech of brakes and a billow of steam. Molly stood on the platform, gripping Thomas's hand tightly as passengers began to disembark. And then they were there, Patrick, tall and serious in his new responsibility. Eileen, her red hair a shade darker than Molly's, her eyes wide as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. And Finn, no longer the little boy of Molly's memory but a growing lad of 9, his face lighting up as he spotted his sister. "Molly!" Finn broke away from Patrick's guiding hand and ran to her, throwing himself into her arms with the abandonment of childhood. "Finn, oh, how I've missed you!" Molly hugged him tightly, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. Over his head, she smiled at Patrick and Eileen, who approached more sedately. "Welcome to Wyoming." There were hugs and introductions, Thomas shaking Patrick's hand solemnly, treating the young man with the respect that acknowledged his role in bringing his siblings safely across the country. Eileen was shy but polite, curtsying to Thomas as she'd been taught. Finn, after his initial exuberance, regarded his new brother-in-law with open curiosity. "Are you really a cowboy?" he asked bluntly. "Rancher," Thomas corrected with a small smile. "But yes, I work with cattle and horses." "Do you have a gun?" Finn's eyes were wide. "Finnegan Sullivan," Molly scolded. "That's not an appropriate question. It's all right," Thomas said. "Yes, Finn, I have firearms. They're tools on a ranch used for hunting and protection, not toys." Finn nodded solemnly. "Patrick says I'm to mind you like I would father if he were still alive." Something flickered in Thomas's eyes, surprise, then a deep warmth. "Well, I hope we can be friends first. The minding will come with time." The journey back to the ranch was filled with questions and observations, the children taking in the vast landscape with varying reactions, Patrick thoughtful, Eileen somewhat overwhelmed, Finn bouncing with excitement at each new sight. "It's so big," Eileen whispered to Molly, pressed against her side on the wagon seat. "Does it ever feel like you might just disappear in all this space?" "At first it did," Molly admitted. "But you get used to it. And there's a freedom in the openness that you'll come to appreciate." As they approached the ranch, Thomas pointed out landmarks, naming trees and plants, describing the wildlife they might see. Finn hung on every word, his earlier reticence forgotten in the face of so many new things to learn. Martha and Hank were waiting at the house, a welcoming committee that immediately set about making the children feel at home. Martha had prepared cookies and hot chocolate, fussing over the poor city children who had traveled so far, while Hank offered to show Patrick the barn and livestock after they'd rested. That evening, seated around the table for the special meal Molly had prepared, she looked at the faces gathered there, her siblings, safe and with her again. Martha and Hank, who had become dear friends, and Thomas, her husband, watching the scene with quiet satisfaction. "I'd like to say grace," Thomas said, surprising her. He wasn't a religious man as far as she knew. "To give thanks for our expanded family." They bowed their heads as Thomas spoke simple words of gratitude for safe journeys and new beginnings. When he finished, he caught Molly's eye across the table, and the look they shared was one of deep understanding they were building something here, something that transcended their initial practical arrangement. Later, after the children had been settled into their new rooms and Martha and Hank had returned to their cabin, Molly and Thomas sat before the fire, reflecting on the day. "They're good children," Thomas said. "You've done well with them." "Thank you." Molly leaned against his shoulder, content. "I was worried Patrick might resent being uprooted from his apprenticeship, but he seems to understand why it was necessary. He's mature for his age, reminds me of myself at that age." Thomas's arm came around her. "I spoke with him privately, you know. While you were getting Eileen and Finn settled." "Oh, what about?" "Told him I respected what he'd done for his family, bringing the little ones all this way. That he's welcome to learn ranching if he's interested, but that I'd also support his continuing education or an apprenticeship in town if that's his preference." Molly turned to look at him, touched by his thoughtfulness. "What did he say?" "Said he'd like to try both for a while. Work with me during the days, perhaps spend some evenings with Jacob Miller learning the mercantile business. Seems he's got a head for numbers. That sounds perfect for him." Molly felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "And you're sure it's not too much, taking on 3 children all at once?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. "When I was in the war," he said finally, "I made a promise to myself. If I survived, if I got the chance to build something of my own, I'd make it count. Not just acres and cattle, but something meaningful." He looked down at her. "This you, the children, making a home together, this is what counts, Molly." She reached up, touching his face gently. I never expected this when I answered your advertisement. I hoped for security, for the chance to provide for my siblings. I didn't dare hope for happiness. Are you happy? The vulnerability in his question caught at her heart. Yes, Thomas, I am. She leaned up, kissing him softly. And I think I'm falling in love with you. The words, unplanned but true, hung between them. For a moment, Thomas seemed stunned, then his arms tightened around her. Molly, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. I never thought to hear those words, never thought to deserve them. You do deserve them, she insisted. You're a good man, Thomas Harrington, the best man I've ever known. He kissed her then, a kiss that spoke of gratitude and wonder and growing love. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. I'm not good with words, Molly, but I'm falling in love with you too. May have been since I first saw you step off that train. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, their lovemaking held a new dimension, not just physical union, but the joining of hearts beginning to trust in the possibility of a love neither had expected to find. The days that followed brought adjustments as the household settled into new routines accommodating the children. Patrick took to ranch work with surprising aptitude, soaking up Thomas's instruction like a sponge. Eileen helped Molly with household tasks and began learning to cook from Martha, revealing a natural talent for baking. Finn, after an initial period of testing boundaries, became Thomas's shadow, following him around the ranch, asking endless questions that Thomas answered with patience Molly hadn't known he possessed. December brought heavier snows and preparations for Christmas. The children, despite initial homesickness, had begun to thrive in the open spaces and clear air of Wyoming. Even Eileen, the most reticent about the move, had developed a friendship with the schoolteacher's younger sister and was flourishing under Martha's grandmother-like attention. One evening, as Christmas approached, Thomas disappeared into his workshop after supper, refusing to let anyone enter. When he emerged hours later, he carried 4 carefully wrapped packages. Early Christmas presents, he explained, setting them on the table. The children gathered eagerly as Molly looked on, curious. Thomas handed the first package to Patrick, who unwrapped it carefully to reveal a finely crafted wooden box with his initials carved into the lid. For your important papers and valuables, Thomas explained. Every man should have a safe place for such things. Patrick ran his fingers over the smooth wood, clearly touched. Thank you, sir. It's excellent craftsmanship. Eileen received a delicate jewelry box with a carved flower pattern, while Finn's gift was a set of wooden animals, horses, cattle, even a small bear and wolf, each detailed with remarkable precision. Did you make all of these? Eileen asked, marveling at the intricate design on her box. Over the past few weeks, Thomas nodded. Wanted you all to have something special for your first Christmas here. What's mine? Molly asked teasingly, eyeing the 4th package. Thomas handed it to her with an uncharacteristically shy smile. Something I've been working on for a while. Molly unwrapped it to find a wooden frame, exquisitely carved with a pattern of wildflowers and pine trees. But it was what the frame contained that brought tears to her eyes. Her letter, the one she had sent in response to his advertisement, the letter that had begun their journey together. I kept it, Thomas said quietly, thought it should be preserved. As a reminder of how we found each other. Molly traced the familiar words with her fingertip, remembering the hopeful, frightened young woman who had penned them, never imagining where they would lead her. It's perfect, she whispered. Thank you. That night, after the children had gone to bed full of excitement about their gifts and the approaching holiday, Molly found Thomas on the porch, looking out at the snow-covered landscape illuminated by a nearly full moon. You've made them so happy, she said, joining him. Made us all happy. He turned, drawing her into the circle of his arms to share his warmth against the cold night. Never thought I'd have this, he confessed. A family, children in the house, you. Are you happy, Thomas? She asked the question she'd been wondering for weeks, with how things have turned out. His laugh was soft in the darkness. Happy doesn't begin to cover it, Molly. I've found something I never knew I was missing. He tightened his arms around her. You know, when you first arrived, when I saw you get off that train looking so nervous but determined, I thought, This is a woman who keeps her promises. I never imagined you'd bring so much more than that." Molly thought back to that day, how frightened she had been, how uncertain of her future with this quiet, weathered man. "I was so afraid you'd be disappointed," she admitted, "that I wouldn't be what you were expecting." "I had no expectations," he said, "just hope. And you've exceeded every hope I could have had." As they stood together in the quiet night, snow beginning to fall gently around them, Molly reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From desperate mail-order bride to beloved wife, from frightened young woman to confident mistress of a growing ranch, from loneliness to love, it was a transformation she could never have imagined. "I love you, Thomas Harrington," she said, the words coming easily now, naturally. His weathered hands cradled her face as he bent to kiss her. "And I love you, Molly Harrington, more than I ever thought possible." The snow fell softly around them, blanketing the ranch in pristine white, as inside the house, the children slept peacefully in their new home. From such unlikely beginnings, a desperate advertisement, an honest response, a leap of faith across thousands of miles had grown a love as vast and enduring as the Wyoming sky, and it had started with a letter, held in weathered hands.